Hey guys, tonight we're leaving behind the palaces and battlefields and stepping into something quieter, something warmer. We're walking into a courtyard in 16th century West Africa where sunlight falls softly on stone, and the only urgency is knowing whether a hide has soaked long enough before it's time to stretch. You probably won't survive this unless you're the kind of person who thinks the smell of warm leather and the sound of soft scraping sounds like the perfect lullaby. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and local time in the comments. Now settle in, maybe turn down the lights or pull a blanket over your knees, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in the Sahel, in the quiet center of a walled city, maybe Djenné, maybe Kano. The morning light is gold, slanting through the narrow alleyways, falling across mud brick walls that have been smoothed by 1,000 hands. The courtyard you've stepped into is rectangular, swept clean. There's no roof, just sky above, and 3 low rooms bordering it, one for soaking, one for drying, and one for stitching. A man sits near the far corner, wrapping cloth around his wrist before he lifts the first skin. He doesn't speak. No one does, because mornings begin in silence here. Here's your mainstream historical fact in 16th century West African cities. Leatherworking was a skilled craft, often passed through families and guild-like associations. Tanneries and workshops operated within the city walls, protected and respected. Artisans worked outdoors, often in courtyards like this, exposed to the light, but sheltered from distraction. Leather from this region was traded far and wide, valued in North Africa, the Middle East, and even Europe for its quality and softness. The man lifts a hide from the soaking jar and drapes it across a low bench. He doesn't press the water out. He lets gravity do the work. Beside him, a young boy brings a folded cloth, no instruction, just habit. Fringe details some workshops used flat river stones, worn smooth, to press and drain leather. These stones weren't labeled or claimed. They were passed from hand to hand, worn into the memory of the courtyard. Each one carried stories in the way it curved against the hide. The boy now settles in near the dye jar, not touching it, not opening it, just sitting, waiting, because his job begins later, and for now, he's learning by watching the pace of someone else's hands. Here's your scholarly uncertainty. How were workshops organized in terms of formal instruction versus informal absorption? Some researchers believe training was structured and assigned. Others argue that children learned by being near, quietly observing the texture, rhythm, and sequence of the day. There are few written rules, but there are endless repetitions. This is your journey-style immersion. You sit down on a low mat near the soaking jar. The leather smells rich and earthy, softened by lye and sun. A splash of water darkens the dust at your feet. A cloth is passed to you, not for work, just to hold. Something to remind you this moment isn't for action. It's for settling in. You breathe deeply, warm air, soft light. The courtyard isn't waking up. It's already awake. And now, so are you. The courtyard has taken on a low, steady rhythm now. Not loud, not sharp, just the sound of water being lifted, skins being turned, hands brushing dust from tools, not because they're dirty, but because they deserve it. You're sitting near the large soaking jar now, Its rim is darkened with use. The water inside is cool and smells faintly of lye, ash, and the long memory of bark. The hide draped across the edge has softened overnight, the edges curling inward like petals left too long in a basin. This is where the work begins, but no one rushes. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Preparing leather in 16th century West Africa involved a slow and layered soaking process. Artisans used a mixture of water and alkaline agents like plant ash or fermented grains to loosen hair and break down connective tissue. The hides were soaked for hours or days, depending on the weather, the type of animal, and the final purpose. Leather for bookbinding, for instance, required more patience than leather for sandals. One artisan leans over the jar now, lifting the hide with a smooth motion that disturbs almost no water. He lets it hang for a moment, then lays it across a low-drying frame, carefully positioning each corner so it stretches evenly. Fringe detail, many leather workers kept specific jars for specific soaks. One for goat, one for cattle, one for hardening, one for softening. They knew which was which not by labels, but by smell, by color, by how the water moved when stirred. One older artisan was known to tap the side of each jar before lifting the lid, not to test it, to greet it. Nearby, the apprentice, the boy from earlier, gently pours fresh water into a smaller bowl, not for soaking, for hand washing, because touching the hide always begins with clean palms, not for sanitation, for respect. Here's your scholarly uncertainty. How much of the soaking process was governed by fixed timing versus instinct? Some sources suggest fixed periods, morning to midday, or sunup to shadow line. Others describe a fluid, responsive process where touch and smell guided every decision. A hide that felt ready was ready, even if the hour said otherwise. This is your journey-style immersion. You move closer to the drying frame. The artisan offers you a corner of hide to hold. It's heavier than you expect, and still dripping slightly. You help pull it tight, not taut, just enough to take shape. The artisan nods once. You feel the cool water run across your knuckles. The boy rinses your hands again with the clean bowl, not because you're done, but because each step is worth closing softly before beginning the next. The hide settles, the light shifts, and in the quiet slosh of one last bowl being poured out, you realize this courtyard doesn't keep time, it keeps texture. The morning sun has now angled just enough to glint off the rim of the water jars. Not sharply, just a small ripple of brightness that dances across the ground, then vanishes behind a fold of cloth hanging on a line. You're seated again, this time in front of a long wooden bench, darkened by use. On it lies a hide, damp, pale, flecked with clinging fibers. Next comes the quietest sound in the workshop, the sound of scraping. Here's your mainstream historical fact, once softened in the soak. Animal hides were scraped clean of hair and excess tissue. This wasn't done with knives, but with curved scrapers made of bone, stone, or horn. The goal wasn't to remove everything by force, but to coax the skin toward readiness without damaging its surface. In West African workshops, this process was done slowly, sometimes over hours, with the artisan sitting cross-legged, the hide draped across his knees or a low frame. You watch as one of the elder workers takes a curved scraper from a clay jar. He doesn't test its edge. He's used it so many times he could probably describe every curve blindfolded. He settles onto his mat, spreads the hide across his lap, and begins, not with a full stroke, with a small press, then a pull, slow, even, soft enough to respect the grain. Fringe details some scrapers were passed down for generations, their edges reshaped not by sharpening, but by repetition. The best ones weren't sharp. They were familiar. One legend tells of a scraper so beloved its owner buried it beside his father's grave, wrapped in the same cloth used for polishing saddlebags. The young apprentice sits beside him now, watching intently, not asking, not fidgeting. The artisan doesn't explain, but every pause, every rewetting of the surface, every wiped stroke is a sentence in an ongoing lesson. No syllabus, just shared rhythm. Here's your scholarly uncertainty. How were these techniques recorded or passed on? If at all, there are no surviving written manuals from this era in the region, but there are oral histories and long-standing family traditions. Some suggest apprentices memorized through repetition alone. Others believe gestures and rhythms were described using poetic metaphor, scrape like brushing millet, or pull as if waking a drumskin. This is your journey-style immersion, the artisan motions for you to take the scraper. You hesitate. It looks ordinary. It feels light. But the moment you hold it to the hide, the texture shifts. Not resistance, not drag, just a whisper of movement. You scrape slowly, an arc, a pause, a breath. The apprentice hands you a cloth to wipe the blade. Not rushed, just timely. A breeze moves through the courtyard now. The leather smells different, earthier, cleaner. The artisan presses the heel of his palm to the surface, not checking, thinking. And you understand this isn't a chore. It's a conversation, one where the hide always gets the last word. The light has stretched farther across the courtyard now, casting long shadows from the edges of stools and water jars, somewhere beyond the walls. A call to prayer murmurs in the distance, then fades. No one here moves in response, not because they're ignoring it, but because they've already made quiet into a kind of prayer of its own. The apprentice shifts his seat, careful not to scrape the bench. He's not working, not yet. He's still watching. Here's your mainstream historical fact in many West African workshops of the 16th century. Apprenticeship didn't begin with tools. It began with silence. Young learners spent months, sometimes years, observing the gestures of elder artisans before ever touching a hide. Learning was sensory, observational, no lectures, no demonstrations, just time, repetition, and quiet presence. The apprentice now leans slightly forward as the artisan begins threading a fresh piece of twine through a small leather pouch. His hands move slowly, fingers stiff from years of use, but still confident. The apprentice mirrors the gesture with invisible thread, shoulders squared, elbows down, miming what he sees. He doesn't ask a question. He doesn't have to. Fringe details, some apprentices were assigned a spot on the mat by their mentor, and they remained there every day, never closer, never farther. That space became their classroom. Some older artisans were known to place a single pebble beside their mat when the apprentice was ready to take up a tool. The pebble would be moved slightly forward, not explained, just moved. The elder now sets down the pouch and takes a strip of leather, already scraped, already softened. He begins to trim it into a narrow strap, slicing slowly with a curved knife. The apprentice shifts again, still miming, still waiting. Here's your scholarly uncertainty was there, a structured timeline for apprentices to advance. Or was it left entirely to the master's discretion? Some scholars argue for informal tiers, marked by tasks, not titles. Others suggest apprentices remained in observation for as long as necessary, sometimes overlapping with each other in an unspoken rhythm of readiness. It wasn't about progress, it was about presence. This is your journey style immersion. You sit behind the apprentice now, just beyond his line of sight. You follow the motion of his shoulders, the way he breathes slightly more deeply when the artisan speeds up, slightly shallower when the stitching slows. You find your own breath matching his. You are learning how to learn. The artisan finally places the pouch beside the tool tray and says nothing. But he doesn't pick up the next piece. The apprentice rises. He walks forward, not confidently, but steadily. He lifts the scrap of twine and begins threading, imperfectly, but without pause. The artisan watches. No nod, no correction, just presence. You close your eyes, not to leave the scene, but to let it continue without needing to watch. Because sometimes the most important gesture is not stepping in, it's staying still long enough to let someone else begin. The sun hangs a little higher now, but the courtyard doesn't hurry. The pace doesn't change with the heat. It just shifts a shape, less scraping, more stirring, as if the day is loosening its shoulders. You notice one artisan near the shaded wall gently lifting a cloth-covered jar, wider at the bottom than the top, with streaks of dark residue trailing down its sides. He sets it down slowly. He unties the cloth, and the scent reaches you almost immediately, sharp, earthy, deep with something like tree bark, and something else like burnt fruit. This is where color begins. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Leather workers in 16th century West Africa used a range of natural dyes derived from plants, bark, leaves, and roots. Tanners mixed these with water and oils to produce rich blacks, rust reds, ochres, and subtle browns. The process took time, sometimes days. The strength of the dye wasn't in its boldness, but in its patience. The artisan removes a small gourd ladle and begins stirring. The mixture inside is thick and dark, clinging to the side of the jar like honey drawn from deep soil. He doesn't rush. Each rotation of the ladle seems to follow breath, not clock. Fringe detail certain dye blends had to be stirred a fixed number of times, 7 clockwise, then 3 counterclockwise, not for superstition, but because that's how the mixture aerated properly. If bubbles didn't rise at the 8th stir, the batch was discarded or left another day to mature. The apprentice from earlier now crouches near a smaller jar, gently wiping its rim with cloth soaked in water and oil. He doesn't stir. He waits. The artisan adds a drop of oil from a folded pouch, crushed seeds, you think, and the color deepens just slightly, like the earth after rain. Here's your scholarly uncertainty where dye recipes, standardized or closely guarded secrets. Some scholars suggest families shared formulas among each other as part of a communal guild culture. Others believe recipes were kept within bloodlines, taught in whispers, or only during particular seasons. Either way, color in this courtyard is never improvised. It's remembered. You're handed a strip of pale leather. Your fingers trace its edge, still damp, still uneven. The artisan motions toward the edge of the large jar, not to dip it fully, just a touch. This is your journey-style immersion. You lower the strip into the dye, only the tip, only long enough to count 3 breaths. Then you pull it free. The color isn't instant. It seeps, like tea in cloth. You wipe it gently on your sleeve, not to test it, to keep it. Across the courtyard, another jar is uncovered. A woman ladles thin blue dye into a shallow bowl. It reflects the sun like still water. The apprentice carries over a strip of cloth and lays it on the edge, not in, just near, because some colors begin with permission, not contact. You sit back again. The air smells stronger now. Bark, oil, stone, memory. And your hands are no longer yours. They're part of something becoming. The courtyard is quieter now, not from stillness, but from a shift in motion. The scraping, soaking, and dyeing have softened into subtler sounds, rubbing cloth, creaking stools. The occasional hush of a sleeve, brushed against skin. You sit near a wooden shelf where tools are laid, not stacked, not scattered, placed, each in its own space, each worn to the shape of the hand that favors it, a curved awl with a wrapped grip, a bone-handled knife, its edge dulled smooth from careful work, a polishing stone with a shallow groove, worn along one side like a thumbprint left in time. No names are written here, but everyone knows what belongs to whom, and yet no one owns anything. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Leatherworking tools in West African workshops were often communal, especially in city-based settings. Artisans used shared knives, burnishers, awls, and spools of thread. These weren't passed out each day. They lived in the courtyard. The tools belonged to the craft, not the craftsman. An artisan steps up to the bench, selects a bone cutter with a notch carved in its handle, and begins trimming the edge of a dyed hide. He doesn't rush, doesn't mark the line. He knows it already. His hand follows a shape he's cut 100 times before. Fringe detail in some workshops. Tools were marked not with initials, but with symbols. 2 short lines for an uncle's blade. A dot for a left-handed burnisher. A curve for a tool that lived by the dye jars. These marks were more like fingerprints than property claims. They reminded you who had taught you how to use it. Another man steps up, selects the same tool when the first is done. No words, no permission, just rhythm. One hand finishing, another hand beginning. The tool never rests. It continues. Here's your scholarly uncertainty where tool-sharing customs formally governed, or simply learned by atmosphere. Some historians propose an oral code, rules spoken once and remembered. Others suggest it was entirely nonverbal, a kind of choreographed etiquette. But all accounts agree, respect was practiced more than preached. This is your journey-style immersion. You're handed a flat burnishing stone, heavy, rounded, warm from use. You cradle it in your palm. You don't use it yet, then just hold it. Let your fingers find the place where others have pressed before. A woman steps beside you, her dyed leather laid flat on a reed mat. She gestures toward a small edge, then nods. You press the stone gently to the corner and begin to rub in circles, small, even. No pressure. The leather darkens slightly beneath your hand, not from heat, from release. You pause, not because you're done, but because you've remembered something without knowing when you learned it. Across the courtyard, someone reties the tool cloth, one knife in, one awl in, the burnisher beside you, soon to follow. And in this rhythm of borrowed things, you feel no lack, only belonging. The day has settled into that long, steady stretch where time no longer matters. You've stopped glancing at the shadows, stopped checking the sky. The courtyard hums on, not loudly, but with that quiet sort of fullness that makes it clear the work is happening, and it's happening right. You move toward the back wall, where three artisans sit cross-legged in a row, each bent over a piece of leather. No patterns, no rulers, just needles, thread, and touch. They're stitching, but none of them look down, because they don't have to. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In 16th century West African leather workshops, stitching was often done without marking lines. Artisans relied on hand memory, distance between fingers, tension felt through thumb and wrist, and cues from the grain of the leather itself. Many products, like pouches, knife sheaths, and sandals, were sewn by feel alone. It wasn't guesswork, it was practice. You watch the nearest artisan thread his needle with quiet ease. No wax, no spit, just a tight twist of fingers, a tug through folded linen. He pierces the leather without measuring. The next hole follows, then another. He doesn't check his spacing. He trusts his body. Fringe details some thread was dyed using leftover pigment from the hides, giving it a subtle match or gentle contrast. Thread color wasn't just aesthetic. It helped the stitch disappear or shine, depending on purpose. Some masters said you could tell how confident a craftsman was by how bold their thread appeared. The woman beside him is working on a round-bottomed pouch. Her stitches are barely visible. She pauses only once to press her knuckle into the leather, feeling for resistance. Then she continues. She's not sewing fast. She's sewing calm. Here's your scholarly uncertainty where they're fixed designs passed down across families. Or did artisans improvise by memory and use? Some scholars say standardized shapes were taught, certain curves for knife holders, specific folds for scroll pouches. Others believe form followed familiarity. Once your hands had sewn something 10 times, they remembered it for you. This is your journey-style immersion. A half-finished pouch is placed in your lap. A needle threaded in rust-red thread rests across its opening. You find the last hole. You line up your stitch. You push the needle through. The thread pulls clean. The leather stretches slightly, then accepts. You do it again and again, not to finish, just to continue. The air is cooler now. The work is slower, but no one stops. Not yet. Someone chuckles softly when a needle snags, but no one looks up. They've learned how to sew without watching, and how to teach without speaking. You tie off your thread and set the pouch down beside the others. It's not perfect, but it belongs, and that's enough. The light in the courtyard has mellowed now. It's no longer bright. It leans toward golden, stretching long and soft across the walls. Tools are quieter. Movements are slower. The work continues, but with that gentle tapering you feel when the body begins to think about rest, even if the hands haven't stopped yet. There's a new figure entering the courtyard. He's older, broader, and walks with a slight tilt to one side, more from habit than age. Strapped across his shoulder is a curved piece of thick, dark leather. Not quite a bag, not quite a shield. He's not part of this workshop, but he's here with a purpose. He's the saddle maker. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In many West African cities, specialized artisans worked closely together, tanners with dyers, cobblers with weavers, saddle makers with general leather workers. Saddles, in particular, required reinforced seams and heavy, treated leather when one part needed mending. The maker often visited a colleague's workshop to request help with specific repairs, usually on the seat, the stirrup straps, or the cinch loops. The man lays the saddle across a padded mat near the bench. He doesn't announce himself. He nods to one of the artisans. That's all. The pouch maker from earlier steps away from her stitching and crouches beside it. Fringe detail saddle makers often carried with them a curved awl tipped in horn, a personal tool, not shared, used only for piercing reinforced leather. Some wrapped the handle with horsehair or tied a strip of dyed cotton around it, not for grip, but to identify it as not for daily work. It was a travel tool, and those weren't borrowed. The artisan examines the saddle, presses gently near the cinch, tugs lightly at the stirrup flap. A seam has come loose, but the leather is still strong. No hurry, no problem, just repair. Here's your scholarly uncertainty were these intercraft exchanges transactional or relational. Some sources suggest payment in coin or food. Others emphasize a barter system between trusted workshops. Your dye for my oil, your stitch for my buckle. Most agree the relationships were personal and slow-growing, built over years of quiet collaboration. This is your journey-style immersion. You sit nearby as the artisan threads a heavier needle with waxed thread, dark and slightly sticky. She doesn't mark the leather. She just begins. One long pull, then a loop, then a knot pressed with her knuckle. The saddle maker watches, not critically, just respectfully. The stitching is slower here, tougher leather, deeper holes, but still, no frustration, no strain. The needle obeys, the thread listens. A bird calls faintly from the other side of the wall. No one answers. The repair is finished. The saddle is returned. No receipt, no handshake, just another nod. And the older man lifts it back over his shoulder, not like a burden, but like a reminder. You lean back against the wall. Your hands are warm from the stitching. Your breath is deep, and somewhere between the thread and the nod, you understand in this courtyard, every visitor is part of the rhythm, even if they only stay for a single stitch. The sun dips lower now, casting angled light through the gaps in the courtyard wall. It pools in quiet corners and warms the edges of baskets and cloth bundles, making even the dust shimmer softly. Most hands are still busy, but one figure moves differently, the water carrier. She enters through a side gate, wrapped in patterned cloth, balancing a wide clay vessel on her shoulder. The pot's rim is slightly chipped, its surface damp. She walks slowly, not because she's tired, but because she knows how not to spill. Everyone sees her. No one stops, but space is made. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Water carriers were essential to the daily rhythm of artisan workshops across 16th century West Africa. They delivered fresh water for soaking, washing, drinking, and dying. Many were women or younger apprentices, and their role was not only logistical, it was ceremonial. The arrival of new water often marked the pause before midday rest or the quiet pivot to gentler tasks. She sets the pot down near the dye jars. The sound is low and deep, a hollow, earthen note. Then she scoops out small bowls of water, offering them in silence, one to the pouch maker, one to the boy near the burnishing bench, one left beside a folded cloth. Fringe detail some water carriers tied cloth rings around the bases of their vessels to mark their origin. A red thread might mean the well near the eastern gate. A braided strip of indigo could signal spring water collected at dawn. Artisans would sometimes choose which batch of water to use based on scent, color, or even the sound of the pour. She sits down now, near the entrance, not on a stool, just the smooth earth. She rests her arms on her knees and watches, not idly, but in the way someone watches a fire they've kept lit. Here's your scholarly uncertainty: were water carriers considered part of the workshop? Or did they serve several at once? Some sources describe them as circulating figures, welcome everywhere, rooted nowhere. Others suggest deep loyalty to a specific courtyard, building knowledge over time, and even advising apprentices on tools and routine. Either way, their rhythm shaped the day. This is your journey-style immersion. The woman hands you a bowl. It's warm, not from heat, but from sun. You sip slowly. The water tastes of earth and time. Not sweet, not cold, just present. You pass the bowl back. She nods once and returns it to the pot. Then she rests again. And you realize this pause isn't her break. It's her presence. She's not here between duties. She's part of the rhythm. The artisans continue their work. The dye darkens. The stitching slows. The scrape of wood against clay signals another bowl filled. No rush. And above it all, the courtyard breathes. With her. Because sometimes the most vital hands are the ones that simply carry water and wait. Shadows have begun to shift again, longer now, falling diagonally across the courtyard. The walls glow faintly from the heat they've held all day. Tools have quieted. Voices, if they happen at all, are murmured and few. You move toward a mat near the eastern wall. Two young apprentices sit there, each with a strip of leather across their knees. One wears a belt of twine around his waist. The other traces a finger along a curve drawn in the dust beside him, not sketching, just following a shape already understood. They are not copying a diagram. They are learning by touch. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In many West African leather workshops, especially those tied to families or guild-like lineages, patterns were not passed down through illustrations or blueprints. They were taught physically, by feel, by replication, and by hands-on correction. A new artisan didn't learn what a bag looked like. They learned how it felt to fold, stitch, and soften the leather into its proper form. One of the boys begins folding his strip. He presses the corners with his thumbs, not creasing, just guiding. The elder beside him offers a palm, not to stop him, but to check alignment. They don't speak. The apprentice adjusts the edge by a finger's width and continues. Fringe details some mentors wore rings carved from bone or horn with a notch in one side. During instruction, they'd press the notch gently against the apprentice's stitching line, not to mark it, but to feel whether the tension was right. These rings were passed down as heirlooms, rarely worn outside the courtyard. The second apprentice now begins threading his strip. He hums softly, tuneless, steady. The rhythm of the song matches the spacing of his stitches. Each loop comes with breath, each pull with silence. Here's your scholarly uncertainty. Did these physical patterning methods vary between regions? Or were they standardized through trade networks? Some researchers suggest that as leather goods traveled between cities like Timbuktu, Kano, and Djenne, regional styles developed their own tactile signatures, folds favored in one city, stitching tension recognized in another. Others argue that the similarities came from shared apprenticeships and overlapping markets. In truth, both probably shaped the hand. This is your journey style immersion. An older artisan sets a piece of half-finished leather before you. A strap, already stitched on one side, waits for its matching edge. He places his hand over yours, not to correct, just to guide. You pull the leather gently, press the corners together. He lifts his hand. You begin stitching, one hole at a time. The needle doesn't resist. The leather shifts in your lap, not to challenge, but to collaborate beside you. The boy with the humming pauses. He watches, then resumes. And you realize patterns are not taught. They are felt into being. The sun has begun to bow low across the rooftops now, casting long amber streaks across the floor of the courtyard. Its heat has softened. The light is gentle now, dim enough to fold into, bright enough to work by just a little longer, in the shade of a reed screen along the western wall. A cloth is spread on the ground. There's no announcement, no bell, no words, just the quiet, practiced shift of posture. Tools are set aside, fingers wiped clean, threads tucked into bowls. It's time for lunch. Here's your mainstream historical fact meals in artisan courtyards were often shared communally, especially during midday heat. Food was brought by family members or apprentices, sometimes prepared in nearby kitchens, sometimes delivered in folded leaves or wrapped cloths. Millet porridge, ground nuts, dried meat, spiced oil, or fermented milk. No formality, no feast, just enough. You watch as bowls are passed around, unpainted, shallow, some chipped. 2 are shared between 5 people. Each hand knows when to reach and when to wait. There's no scooping, just pinches, just portions that respect the rhythm of the bowl. Fringe detail older artisans sometimes brought flat spoons carved from baobab wood, worn smooth at the edges. These were passed down, not as personal property, but as talismans. Not everyone used them, but when they appeared, they were placed beside folded cloth, never directly on the ground. The porridge smells slightly sour, slightly nutty. It's warm, not hot. It sticks gently to the fingers and leaves a faint sheen on the skin. You're handed a small scoop, barely 2 bites. No one offers more. No one needs to. This is not a meal for fullness. It's a meal for continuity. Here's your scholarly uncertainty where lunch breaks scheduled or simply known by feel. There are no surviving records that dictate the timing, but oral traditions suggest that the courtyard itself signaled the pause, when dye jars cooled, when thread snapped more often, when shadows reached the back wall. The artisans didn't check a sundial. They listened to the work. This is your journey-style immersion. You kneel beside the others, folding your legs beneath you. A cloth-wrapped parcel is unwrapped in your direction. a small handful of dried okra, coated in oil and salt. You take one piece. That's enough. The taste is earthy, soft, uncomplicated. No one speaks, but someone smiles, and for a few minutes, the courtyard forgets it was ever about leather or dye. It becomes just bodies, breathing, digesting, resting in the quiet hum of a place that doesn't demand you leave when the work is done, just that you come back when the hands are ready. One boy finishes chewing and lays back against the wall. Someone else folds the cloth. Lunch is over, not because a bell rang, but because the bowl is empty. The afternoon air leans cooler now, not cold, just brushed with a breeze that moves through the courtyard like a polite guest. The light has shifted again, warming everything it touches: tools, mats, folded cloth, before slipping slowly into the corners. The bowls from lunch have been rinsed and set aside, cloths refolded, and the leather, now darker from time and work, is ready for its final touches. This is the time for burnishing. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Burnishing is the finishing process where the edges of leather pieces are smoothed and sealed. Artisans in West African workshops used smooth stones, bones, or wood, sometimes dipped in water, sometimes in oil, to gently polish the sides of bags, belts, sandals, or book covers. This final step was not about shine, it was about cohesion. Burnishing prevented fraying and gave the item a sense of finished weight. Near the bench, a man takes a strip of leather and presses it between two fingers. He rubs a smooth riverstone along the edge slowly, in repeated circles. The motion isn't strong, it's steady. You don't hear friction, you hear rhythm, one breath per circle. Fringe details: some artisans carved their own burnishers from hardwoods passed down by relatives or mentors. These tools were marked, not for ownership, but for memory. A notch here meant a wedding gift, stitched in spring. A groove there marked the satchel that crossed the desert to Morocco and returned. A younger artisan dips her fingertips into a shallow bowl of water and runs them along a curved edge, not to soak it, just to wake the surface. Then she begins rubbing with the bone of a sheep's leg, worn perfectly smooth by years of use. She doesn't check her work, she feels it. Here's your scholarly uncertainty where burnishing techniques standard or personalized. Some sources suggest apprentices copied their mentor's pressure, speed, and tool preference exactly. Others describe a more intuitive method, artisans developing their own favored motions and finishing rituals. One traveler recorded that no two belts from the same courtyard looked exactly alike, but all of them felt finished. This is your journey-style immersion. You are handed a half-finished pouch. The edges are soft, slightly raised. A burnisher, carved from blackened wood, is placed in your palm. It fits oddly at first, then naturally. You rub along the edge, slowly. No pressure, just motion. The leather warms beneath your hand. The fibers settle. You aren't changing the pouch. You're coaxing it to rest. Across the courtyard, someone begins humming, not a song, just a phrase of sound. Someone else picks it up. And as you burnish, the pouch grows quieter in your hand. The day softens again, not toward ending, just toward stillness. The courtyard now rests in amber light, low and soft, stretching shadows until they touch one another like fingertips brushing in passing. The work has quieted, but it hasn't stopped. Movements are slower, breathing deeper. There's no final task announced. But every artisan knows it's time for oil. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The final treatment in many West African leather workshops involved oiling the surface of the leather. Natural oils, extracted from seeds like shea, baobab, or ground nuts, were gently rubbed into finished pieces to deepen color, preserve flexibility, and enhance water resistance. This was done with fingertips or cloth, often in silence, and sometimes in pairs, one person holding the item still while the other worked in the oil. Near the dye jars, a woman sits cross-legged beside a low wooden tray. On it, a shallow ceramic bowl filled with oil the color of dusk, dark, golden brown, thick. It smells faintly sweet, faintly nutty, not overpowering, just earthy. She dips 2 fingers in, presses them together, then begins with a circle, one motion, pause, another. Fringe details some oils were stored with bits of bark or herb folded into the jar, not for scent, but to keep them from turning. Others were kept in shadow for days before use, believed to work better if they rested before returning to the skin. One apprentice swore that oil worked best when applied while humming softly, because rhythm helped the leather remember how to bend. Across the courtyard, you see another artisan oiling a scroll case, one stripe at a time, then buffing gently with a palmful of folded cloth. The hide darkens slightly, not uniformly, not like paint, like fruit ripening. Here's your scholarly uncertainty where different oils matched to specific types of leather or uses. Or was it based on availability? Some historians believe shea oil was preferred for soft items, bags, sandals, bindings, while harder leathers were treated with thicker, tackier oils. Others argue the distinction was more seasonal, based on what was pressed and traded. What's certain is that oil was never rushed. It was applied with care, with conversation. This is your journey-style immersion. Someone sets a belt in your lap, well stitched, burnished, its color still uneven. You're handed a small gourd of oil, wrapped with cloth for grip. You tilt it, just slightly. A drop rolls out, thicker than water, thinner than syrup. You place your fingers to the leather. You begin to rub, slow circles, not for shine, for settling. You feel the leather soften under your touch. The smell rises, not sharp, familiar, like something you forgot you loved. Across the courtyard, someone folds a finished bag and places it beside the wall. Another covers the oil bowl again. The lid fits perfectly, like a breath ending, and the light now rests fully in orange, as if the courtyard itself has been oiled, gently, finally, into stillness. The sun has reached the far edge of the courtyard wall. It no longer lights the space directly, only grazes it, catching on the tops of hanging tools and the rims of empty jars. The courtyard doesn't dim all at once. It recedes, folds into itself. The air cools, the shadows widen, and without a single command, the day begins its gentle undoing. This is the hour of closing. Here's your mainstream historical fact: leather workshops in 16th century West Africa followed natural light rather than mechanical time. The workday ended when the sun's warmth left the courtyard. There were no whistles, no bells, only the shared understanding that when light bent past the dye bench, it was time to prepare for tomorrow, not with speed, but with sequence. You watch as a boy rises and begins folding unused cloths, not in a rush. Each fold is square, careful, pressed at the edges with his thumbs. Another apprentice wipes down the scraping bench, not scrubbing, just smoothing away dust and dye. Even the tools seem to shift subtly in posture, leaning more into stillness than use. Fringe detail, many workshops wrapped their smaller tools, burnishers, awls, dye ladles, in cloth bundles bound with a single loop of string. Some left a small pinch of salt tucked inside the wrap, believing it preserved the tools and reminded them of skin, sweat, and earth. The bundles weren't labeled. Everyone knew which was which. An older artisan checks the hides still hanging on the line. A few are dry enough to roll. He doesn't stack them. He leans them softly along the wall, curved like the question mark of a finished day. Here's your scholarly uncertainty where they're fixed tasks assigned to specific individuals for workshop closure. Or did everyone simply perform what was needed? Some accounts mention roles passed down, apprentices wiping tools, elders folding hides. Others suggest it was shared instinct, whoever saw what needed doing did it. The silence of the process suggests not instruction, but rhythm. This is your journey style immersion. Someone hands you a cloth. It's stained with dye, but dry. You're shown how to fold it, twice lengthwise, once across. You repeat the motion. Your fingers remember the warmth of the leather, the curve of the thread, the weight of the oil. You place the folded cloth on the shelf, next to another and another. One boy lights a small oil lamp and places it inside the empty dye room, not to work by, but to mark it closed. Another stacks dried gourd ladles inside a basket, each one echoing softly as it settles. You step back, breathe in. The courtyard smells of dust, bark, and heat fading from stone, and slowly, everything that was open begins to fold. Everything that was needed begins to wait. The work hasn't ended. It's only paused, wrapped, not finished, folded, not forgotten. The courtyard has surrendered to dusk completely now. The last light lingers only as suggestion on the rims of empty bowls, the folds of a cloak, the slope of a wall smoothed by time. The work is done. The tools are still. But no one has left, because even after closing, the courtyard remains a place to sit, to breathe, to rest. You're lying back now, not on a mat or a bed, but on the worn ground where dozens have sat before you. The clay beneath you is warm from the day, now cooling slowly, like an ember inside the earth. Around you, a few quiet figures. One hums under her breath, one leans against the wall, arms crossed, eyes half closed. No one speaks, but no one's alone. Near your hand rests a bundle of finished leather, dyed dark, burnished smooth, and oiled with care. You place your palm on it gently. The surface is warm. The scent is subtle, like old bark and distant smoke. It doesn't pull your attention. It grounds it. The message here is not urgency. It's presence. You close your eyes. You don't need to imagine anything. It's already here, the weight of work complete. The quiet bodies around you, the last bird song threading through the city rooftops. A bowl tipped sideways, empty but clean. The courtyard doesn't say goodnight. It just allows it. So let your breath settle, in through the nose, out slowly. Let your body remember the weight of cloth folded in your lap, the feel of thread pulling smooth, the warmth of oil across your fingers. Let your thoughts slow to the rhythm of stone across leather. Nothing more is required of you. Not now, not here. You are in a place that worked quietly, and then rested just as quietly. And that is enough. So rest now, wrapped in the scent of tanned leather, folded between shadow and song, still and gently complete.